You discover through mutual connections or through direct observation that the avoidant is experiencing profound emotional distress after rejecting you or after their patterns pushed you away. They are crying, expressing regret, communicating to others that they made a terrible mistake, demonstrating visible suffering that contradicts every assumption you held about their emotional detachment and their defended indifference. This discovery shakes your understanding of the situation because throughout the relationship, you believed they did not care deeply. You assumed their defended presentation reflected their internal experience. You concluded their ability to reject you or to maintain patterns that drove you away indicated you meant little to them emotionally. The tears and the expressed regret suggest the opposite reality. Perhaps they cared more than their defended behavior suggested. Perhaps losing you affects them more profoundly than you imagined. Perhaps their rejection or their patterns came despite genuine feelings rather than reflecting an absence of feelings. The visible emotional distress particularly impacts you if you still harbor feelings for them or if you question whether leaving was the correct decision. Their tears seem to confirm they recognize what they lost. They seem to indicate a breakthrough, where defended walls have finally crumbled, allowing genuine feeling to emerge. They seem to suggest they understand now what they could not understand while you were available. You wonder whether their regret indicates they have finally developed the capacity to be different, whether their suffering demonstrates they value you in ways their behavior never demonstrated, whether their emotional display represents a turning point where they will finally do the work to address patterns that cost them the relationship with you. The tears activate your compassion and your desire to comfort. They activate your hope that perhaps the relationship could work if you gave them another chance, now that they apparently recognize their mistake. They activate your doubt about whether you should maintain boundaries when they are clearly suffering about losing you. Yet, the avoidance tears after rejecting you or after losing you serve complex psychological functions that have little to do with genuine recognition of your value or genuine capacity for change behavior. The tears are a real emotional experience. The avoidant is genuinely suffering, genuinely experiencing grief and regret, genuinely feeling pain about the loss. Yet the object of their grief is not you as a complete person they finally appreciate. The object is what you provided for them that made their defended existence comfortable, what your accommodation allowed them to avoid facing about themselves, what your presence offered without requiring reciprocal vulnerable investment they remain incapable of sustaining. They mourn the loss of their comfortable defended position rather than mourning the loss of an intimate partnership with you. They regret losing the safety and accommodation you provided rather than regretting their inability to meet your legitimate needs. They grieve that their patterns finally had consequences rather than grieving that their patterns harmed you throughout the relationship. The regret also emerges from specific timing that reveals its defensive nature rather than its genuine growth nature. The avoidant rejected you or maintained patterns that pushed you away without apparent emotional difficulty. They could end the relationship or could sustain patterns that made the relationship untenable while appearing relatively unaffected emotionally. The tears and regret emerge only after you are gone, only after distance exists, only after they face the consequences of their choices. This delayed emotional response suggests emotions serve a defensive function related to loss and its consequences rather than representing genuine recognition that would have prevented rejection or would have motivated pattern change while you were available. If they genuinely valued you and recognized their mistake while the relationship was salvageable, emotion would have motivated different behavior before you left, rather than emerging only after departure makes behavior change irrelevant to the current situation. The tears also frequently include manipulation, conscious or unconscious, designed to restore their position, to neutralize consequences, to bring you back into providing what they lost when you left. They may express regret directly to you, hoping emotional vulnerability will soften boundaries you established. They may communicate suffering to mutual friends, knowing information will reach you and will activate your compassion. They may post on social media in ways that suggest emotional devastation designed to generate your concern or your contact. These manipulative elements do not necessarily indicate tears are fake. Tears can be a genuine emotional experience while simultaneously serving the manipulative function of restoring the avoidant's lost comfortable position without requiring genuine change in the patterns that necessitated your departure. Understanding the avoidant's tears and regret requires holding complexity. Their emotional pain is real, while the object of that pain is selfish rather than reflecting genuine appreciation of you. Their regret is genuine, while that regret does not translate into capacity for changed behavior. Their suffering serves defensive and manipulative functions while being an authentic emotional experience they are having. The tears should not activate your hope that they have changed, or your guilt about maintaining boundaries while they suffer. The regret does not indicate they have developed insight about their patterns or capacity to build a healthy relationship. The emotional display protects them from genuine accountability while generating your sympathy that serves their defensive needs rather than serving relationship growth or your well-being. The tears are real, but they're mourning their lost comfort, not recognizing your value. The avoidance tears after rejecting you or losing you represent genuine emotional pain. They are not performing suffering to manipulate you. They are not faking emotion to generate sympathy. They are experiencing real grief that manifests through crying and visible distress that observers, including mutual friends, can verify as authentic. Yet the authenticity of emotional pain does not indicate the avoidant finally recognizes your value as a complete person, finally appreciates what you brought to their life beyond what you provided for their defended comfort, or finally understands the depth of connection they lost. The tears reflect grief about specific losses that center their experience and their comfort, rather than reflecting appreciation of you as a valuable partner whose needs deserved adequate reciprocation. The avoidant mourns the loss of their comfortable defended position that your presence and your accommodation maintained throughout the relationship. You absorbed the emotional labor that made the relationship function despite their defended limitations. You initiated most contact, maintaining connection they would not maintain. You planned activities, creating shared experiences they would not create. You provided emotional support, managing difficulties they would not reciprocally support you through. You tolerated their withdrawal without implementing consequences that would make withdrawal costly. This accommodation allowed them to maintain a defended, comfortable position where they received relationship benefits without having to provide vulnerable reciprocal investment, where they could remain emotionally distant without losing connection, where they could prioritize defended autonomy without sacrificing relationship security. Your departure eliminated this comfortable position. They must now manage their own emotional labor, must maintain their own connections, must face defended isolation, without your presence buffering them from the full consequences of their defended patterns. They mourn the specific comforts you provided that made their daily life function better. You may have managed household responsibilities, allowing them to avoid tasks they dislike. You may have provided social connection, introducing them to friends or maintaining relationships with couple friends they would not maintain independently. You may have offered emotional regulation, helping them process feelings they struggle to process alone. You may have created life structure and stability that compensated for their defended avoidance of commitment and planning. You may have provided practical support with logistics, with decision-making, with navigating challenges that feel overwhelming to their defended psychology. Your departure eliminated all these specific comforts. They face tasks they avoided, lose social connections you maintained, struggle with emotional regulation you provided, confront life chaos that your structure prevented, and handle alone what you helped them manage. The tears reflect grief about these lost comforts rather than grief about losing an intimate partnership with you as a valued equal. The avoidant particularly mourns the loss of someone who understood their defended psychology without requiring extensive explanation or without judging their patterns harshly. You developed deep understanding of their attachment wounds, their defended needs, their triggers, and their sensitivities through extended time and through your investment in comprehending their psychology. This understanding allowed them to feel known in ways their defenses usually prevent. You saw beneath their defended presentation to their wounded, authentic self, and you accepted what you saw there without rejection. Finding another person who will develop similar depth of understanding requires time and vulnerable investment the avoidant struggles to provide. They recognize that replacing your specific understanding is improbable because your understanding developed through your extensive, patient accommodation that most people with healthy boundaries will not provide. The tears reflect grief about losing this specific understanding rather than reflecting recognition that your understanding deserved reciprocal effort to understand you and to meet your needs. They also mourn the loss of the relationship position where you loved them more than they loved you, where you invested more than they invested, where imbalance favored their defended comfort. Throughout the relationship, you were the one who cared more, who tried harder, who sacrificed more. This imbalance protected them from vulnerability that equal investment would require while allowing them to receive benefits of your greater investment. Your departure eliminated this protected position. If they want a future relationship, they must find someone willing to provide similar imbalanced investment, or they must learn to invest equally, which requires vulnerability their defenses resist. The tears reflect grief about losing a protected, imbalanced position rather than reflecting recognition that imbalance was unfair or that equal partnership would have been healthier for both of you. The mourning particularly centers on their loss of control that your departure created. Throughout the relationship, they controlled engagement level. They determined when to be close and when to create distance. They decided how much emotional availability to provide and when to withdraw. You accommodated this control by accepting whatever level of engagement they chose without implementing consequences that would limit their control. Your departure eliminated their control. They can no longer determine engagement level because you are not available to engage with. They cannot manage distance because you created permanent distance. They cannot close. They cannot control relationship outcome because you made the final decision they did not authorize. The tears reflect grief about this lost control rather than reflecting genuine recognition of your autonomy and your right to protect yourself from their controlling patterns. The avoidance grief also focuses on their lost backup option or safety net that your continued availability provided. Even when they rejected you or when their patterns pushed you away, they assumed you would remain accessible if they eventually decided they wanted a relationship with you. You would be there waiting if they changed their mind. If circumstances changed, if they decided your value exceeded the discomfort intimacy with you created, your disappearance eliminated this backup option. You are not waiting for them, not remaining available for their potential future interest, not maintaining yourself as a safety net they could return to if other options proved unsatisfying. The tears reflect grief about the loss of security of having you as a backup, rather than reflecting genuine recognition that treating you as a backup option rather than as a priority was a profound disrespect of your value and your time. Understanding that tears mourn lost comfort rather than recognizing your value allows you to interpret their emotional display accurately without being manipulated by authentic suffering that serves a selfish rather than relational purpose. They are genuinely sad about what they lost. But what they lost is the defended, comfortable position your accommodation provided. It is the specific comforts that made their life easier. It is the understanding that required your extensive investment without reciprocation. It is the imbalanced dynamic that protected them from vulnerability. It is the control they maintained at your expense. It is the backup option that disrespected your worth. The tears are not about appreciating you as a complete, valuable person whose needs deserved meeting. Tears are about mourning the loss of what you provided for them, while they provided inadequate reciprocation. This recognition prevents you from softening boundaries or returning to provide comfort. They mourn. They mourn losing the comfortable, defended position that required your sacrifice, and returning would simply restore that harmful dynamic without addressing the patterns that made the relationship unsustainable and that necessitated your self-protective departure. Regret doesn't equal change. They'd recreate the same patterns that forced you away. The avoidant experiences genuine regret after losing you, regret about rejecting you, regret about maintaining patterns that drove you away, regret about not doing things differently while you were available, regret about losing the relationship that provided comforts and benefits they miss intensely now that those comforts and benefits are gone. This regret feels significant and suggests potential for change. If they genuinely regret their choices, if they recognize their patterns caused loss, if they understand their behavior was problematic, then perhaps they have developed insight and motivation that would allow different behavior if reconnection occurred. The regret activates your hope that perhaps they have learned from losing you. Perhaps painful consequences finally created a breakthrough that your presence and your patience could not create. Perhaps their suffering has generated growth that makes reconciliation viable. Yet, regret about consequences is fundamentally different from capacity for changed behavior. The avoidant regrets losing you and losing the comforts your presence provided. This regret stems from experiencing negative consequences of their patterns rather than from developing insight about the underlying defended structure that generates those patterns. Regretting consequences does not indicate they understand their defended patterns. It does not suggest they have examined their attachment wounds. It does not demonstrate they have done therapeutic work to restructure the defenses that created problematic behaviors. Regretting loss is a passive emotional experience. They feel bad about the outcome. Changing patterns requires active, sustained therapeutic work. Examining defended structure, understanding attachment wounds, practicing vulnerability despite discomfort, developing new relational capacities through deliberate effort across extended time. The avoidant can genuinely regret losing you while maintaining exactly the same defended structure that generated patterns that cost them the relationship with you. Their defenses remain unchanged. They still struggle with vulnerability, still experience intimacy as threatening, still need defended distance to manage their anxiety, still resist commitment that activates engulfment fears, still suppress emotions rather than expressing them, still prioritize defended autonomy over relational connection. These unchanged defenses would generate the same problematic patterns if the relationship resumed, because patterns emerge from defended structure rather than from conscious choices the avoidant makes about how to behave. Regretting patterns is not equivalent to restructuring the defenses that generate patterns. The avoidant can cry about losing you while remaining exactly the same person whose defended limitations necessitated your departure. The regret particularly fails to indicate capacity for change when the avoidant has done no meaningful therapeutic work to address the defended patterns they claim to regret. They regret losing you, yet they have not engaged trauma-informed therapy to heal the attachment wounds that created their defended structure. They regret their emotional unavailability, yet they have not practiced vulnerability in lower stakes relationships to develop emotional expression capacity. They regret their withdrawal patterns, yet they have not examined why intimacy threatens them or worked to expand their tolerance for closeness. They regret their inconsistency, yet they have not developed accountability structures or examined why commitment activates their defenses. The absence of meaningful change-oriented work demonstrates their regret is about consequences rather than being about genuine commitment to developing different capacities that would prevent similar patterns in future relationships. The unchanged defended structure means reconnection would likely recreate the original problematic dynamic within a relatively short time, regardless of how genuine their current regret appears. The initial period after reconnection might include temporary improvement motivated by fear of losing you again. They might provide more consistent presence, more emotional availability, more apparent investment than they provided before. Yet this temporary improvement represents a crisis-driven override of defenses rather than representing a restructured defended psychology. Once the immediate crisis passes, once you are secured again and fear of loss decreases, defenses reassert and original patterns resume because the underlying structure generating those patterns remains unchanged despite temporary override. The cycle repeats. Patterns resume. You face the same struggles. The relationship becomes unsustainable again. Either you leave again or they reject again. They experience regret again that leads to no actual change again. The avoidance regret also coexists with unchanged defended narratives that prevent genuine accountability and genuine learning from loss. Even while expressing regret, they maintain narratives that deflect responsibility. The relationship failed due to bad timing rather than due to their patterns. You were not patient enough with their struggles rather than their struggles requiring therapeutic work they refused to engage. You expected too much rather than you expecting a normal relationship baseline they could not provide. External circumstances prevented relationship success rather than their defended limitations, making the relationship unsustainable. These defended narratives contradict the regret. If timing was the problem, why regret their behavior? If you were impatient, why regret their patterns that required such patience? If your expectations were excessive, why regret failing to meet them? The contradictory narratives coexist because regret serves the emotional function of managing their grief, while defended narratives serve the protective function of preventing accountability that would require genuine examination of their role in relationship failure. The regret without change also reveals itself through the avoidance focus on what they lost rather than on the harm they caused. Their regret centers on their suffering, their loss, their grief about missing you and missing the comforts you provided. The regret is self-focused rather than other-focused. Genuine growth would include recognition of harm their patterns caused you, understanding of the pain you experienced during the relationship, acknowledgement of the sacrifice you made to accommodate their defended limitations, and remorse about the damage their patterns created in your well-being and your self-worth. Yet avoidant regret typically lacks this other-focused component. They feel bad about what they lost without demonstrating genuine understanding of what they did to you, without taking accountability for the harm their patterns caused, without expressing remorse that centers your experience rather than centering their loss. Understanding that regret does not equal change allows you to maintain boundaries and forward focus, despite their expressed regret and their apparent suffering about losing you. Regret about consequences is not evidence of capacity for different behavior. Genuine feelings about loss do not translate into restructured defenses that would prevent similar patterns if the relationship resumed. Their tears and their expressed regret serve their emotional processing needs without indicating they have done or will do the therapeutic work that actual change requires. You should assess potential for change not through their expressed regret or their emotional pain, but through evidence of meaningful therapeutic work. Are they in trauma-informed therapy? Are they demonstrating behavioral changes that persist across months? Are they taking genuine accountability for their patterns? Are they practicing vulnerability and examining their defended structure? Are they developing insight about their attachment wounds and their defensive mechanisms? Without such evidence, regret is simply a painful emotion about consequences rather than being motivation that has translated into genuine change work. Reconnecting based on their regret without evidence of change work sets up a repetition of the original dynamic where you sacrifice yourself, accommodating patterns they regret but do not actually change through sustained therapeutic effort. Their tears manipulate your compassion while protecting them from genuine accountability. The avoidance tears after rejecting you or losing you serve multiple psychological functions simultaneously. The tears are a genuine emotional expression of their pain, while also serving defensive purposes that protect them from accountability and that manipulate your response in ways that serve their needs rather than serving relationship growth or your well-being. The tears activate your compassion because witnessing someone you cared about in visible emotional pain generates a natural empathic response. It generates a desire to comfort them and to alleviate their suffering. It generates questioning of whether maintaining boundaries that contribute to their pain is too harsh or too cruel. This activated compassion makes you vulnerable to softening boundaries you established, to returning to provide comfort, to accepting their regret as sufficient evidence of change to justify giving them another chance. The tears particularly manipulate when the avoidant expresses them to you directly or ensures you become aware of them through mutual connections or through social media. The communication of their suffering is not an accident. A conscious or unconscious motivation exists to make you aware of their pain in ways that will activate your compassion and will generate your response. They may reach out directly with tearful messages, expressing their regret and their suffering, hoping your compassion will override your boundaries. They may discuss their emotional state with mutual friends, knowing those friends will convey information to you, activating your concern. They may post vaguely about their pain on social media platforms they know you monitor, creating an impression of devastation designed to generate your sympathy. These communications serve a specific purpose beyond simple emotional expression. They are designed to affect you, to generate your response, to potentially restore contact and connection that your boundaries eliminated. The manipulative function operates regardless of whether manipulation is a conscious strategic choice or an unconscious defensive mechanism. Some avoidants consciously calculate that displaying emotion will generate a desired response from you. They understand your compassionate nature. They know emotional vulnerability activates your caretaking tendencies. They deliberately show suffering to exploit your empathy in service of their goal to restore the relationship or restore their comfortable position. Other avoidants unconsciously employ emotional display as a defensive mechanism learned through childhood experiences. They learned that emotional distress generates others' caretaking responses that meet their needs. They learned that appearing vulnerable protects them from accountability or consequences. They automatically employ tears as a defensive strategy without conscious awareness they are manipulating. Whether conscious or unconscious, the function remains the same. Tears serve to generate your compassionate response that serves their defensive needs. The tears also protect the avoidant from genuine accountability by shifting focus from their patterns and their responsibility to their suffering and their need for comfort. When they display emotional pain about losing you, attention shifts from what patterns they demonstrated that necessitated your departure to the fact they are suffering and need support. The focus moves from their behavior to their pain, from their accountability to their vulnerability, from examination of their patterns to compassion for their distress. This shifted focus allows them to avoid genuine reckoning with their patterns because your compassion and your desire to comfort overrides your legitimate anger about their behavior, your need for their accountability, and your requirement that they demonstrate understanding of the harm their patterns caused before you consider reconnection.